Okay, great.
All right.
Yeah.
That's a very funny story. I would say maybe it's tragicomic
Okay.
a bit. But I went to high school, which so it was like I don't know how you say it in English, which is kind of like a more science-focused curriculum. So
Okay.
we of course had history and literature, but the focus was more on mathematics. And specifically, I went to the class which had emphasis on computer science.
Okay.
So we started learning programming in high school, but it turns out that I was quite good at high school chemistry. So I never had to study for the exams, and I did quite well on all the tests with minimum effort. So I decided that instead of going to computer science for university, I made the choice to go into chemistry instead. One of the reasons was that both subjects were interesting for me.
Mm-hmm.
Chemistry seemed to me that it's kind of more hands-on topic.
Mm-hmm.
So, like computer science, I didn't want to have a job where I have to sit in front of the computer all day.
Okay.
Which is very funny because I do sit in front of a computer every day and
Okay.
all day. So, yeah, so I went into a chemistry program at university, where I guess I got lucky, probably, but I got an offer from the department head of analytical chemistry in my second year to join their research group.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't know, one of my other professors was impressed with my performance on his exams.
Okay.
And when I was taking another exam at the class of this department head, so because these two professors were in the same department, for some weird reason, when I was taking the exam, this other professor, he walks in and he recognizes me and he tells the department head, "Oh, this guy, he just took my exam a few days ago and he was really good."
Okay.
So I guess I got like a little boost there, and after the exam I got offered this position at his lab as an undergraduate.
Mm-hmm.
So since then I was doing one or type of research or another. And so after graduating my master's degree, I went to work at a pharma company. So I was a researcher for 3 years. They're doing like research for the quality assurance purposes. So the company, they develop new drugs, and so for every new drug they have to come up with not just the manufacturing but also every drug presents a new challenge for quality assurance. So our team was tasked to develop these quality assurance methods for the novel drug substances, which was what I was doing for 3 years. And after that, I decided to pursue a PhD. And I ended up doing physical chemistry. So I pivoted to semiconductors, so material science, physical chemistry, that kind of more theoretical. So, everyone should know about at least silicon semiconductors because they are everywhere. And it's in the camera, it's in the microphone, it's in everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So silicon is the semiconducting material that all, or at least most of the microchips that we use today, this material is present in all of them.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, it is one of the most important, if not the most important technologies of our lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
So some people would go as far as the reason that the United States won the Cold War against the Soviet Union is because the United States managed to manufacture the high purity silicon which was needed for the computer chips, and the Soviet Union could never get to the level, and so they just fell behind technologically and of course because of all the embargoes they couldn't get their hands on the most advanced chips. And this is why today also in geopolitics export control on microchips is also like one of the major weapons of the US against other powers like China or Russia. So this is a very important technology, and silicon semiconductors is a very mature technology. So doing any research on that requires a lot of money.
Okay.
And that is what some companies still can do. I think Intel is really far behind.
Mm-hmm.
Like Samsung, SK Hynix in Korea, these are some very large companies that still do research in silicon,
Mm-hmm.
and the TSMC in Taiwan. So these, basically TSMC, Samsung and SK Hynix, these three companies are the only powers on this planet who can still do valuable research on silicon chemistry and silicon based semiconductors, because it is just a very mature technology, and basically almost all the optimizations that could be done was already done. But silicon is not the perfect material for everything.
Mm-hmm.
So there are some applications for which silicon is quite bad. So if you think about like televisions,
Mm-hmm.
so modern screens or even your phone screen, so these have like millions of pixels in it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so every pixel has to be driven separately by a separate part of electronics. So it's not like the old CRT TVs when you had just like a controller, and at the back end the single controller could control the beam through the whole screen, and your screen was basically just a glass with some chemicals in it. Now all the separate pixels are separately driven by transistors and capacitors. And so if you have silicon, if you have ever seen silicon, that is a gray, kind of has some kind of metallic shine, but it is definitely not transparent.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have silicon semiconductors in your screen, that means that maybe half of your pixel is dead space, which cannot produce any light. So for that purpose, other types of semiconductors had to be developed. Mm-hmm. And for that, metal oxides, so one of the earliest was this indium gallium zinc oxide material, which is transparent. About like 90-95% of visible light can pass through it. So if you can use this to make your electronics in your screen, then you don't have to put such a high intensity light in it, because now you can utilize the whole area to produce the picture, so you don't have anything blocking it.
Okay.
Of course, those materials have their own downsides, so usually they don't have such a high performance as silicon, so you couldn't use that material everywhere,
Mm-hmm.
but there are specific applications. And my research is, so I worked on oxide semiconductors, but most of the time I worked on organic semiconductors. So organic in chemistry just means that it's like a carbon-based
Okay.
materials. So if you have like an OLED TV that is based on organic light-emitting diodes,
Mm-hmm.
that contains organic semiconductors. So the advantage of organic materials is that because carbon chemically is very versatile,
Mm-hmm.
so one carbon atom can have 4 chemical bonds, and carbon atoms can bond with each other and form very long carbon chains, which means that it's like basically an infinite variety of materials that you can make using carbon.
Okay.
So this is why our bodies are mostly made up of carbon,
Mm-hmm.
because this is a very versatile element. And so if you use carbon-based materials, you can have a very high variety of materials that you can come up with, and based on exactly what kind of properties you want to get, you
Mm-hmm.
can modify these materials. And so this is basically what most of my research is testing different types of organic materials, testing what kind of performance you can get out of them, what kind of unique use cases you can apply them to. And so one interesting comparison, for example, just to give you like an overview,
Yeah.
is that for LEDs based on inorganic materials, so like silicon, gallium, those kind of things. Making, I might be confusing this, but so making it like a red colored LED was very easy, and I don't remember which one, the green or the blue, but one of them was very difficult to get because you have a very limited range of inorganic materials that you can use for making a semiconductor. But for organic semiconductors, it's not just about like, can you get a blue? Basically, you can design a molecule with an exact blue color that would match like the human vision system the most. So for some purposes, you have a very high flexibility for designing new materials for new purposes with organic semiconductors. Yeah, so I don't have my own research team. So currently I am like a contracted professor at the university, which means that I don't get my own research group. So my research is mostly based on like working with other teams. So I work together with other professors and their students. And usually I would say that most of the students are very interested. So especially here in Korea, there's a lot of prestige in working for like either Samsung or SK Hynix or the handful of other industry players that are in the semiconducting field. So I think a lot of students are very interested in this for the practical purpose of getting a job in the future.
Okay.
But everyone knows that if they want to have the best jobs in this area, then they have to get some interesting results. So I would say that generally the working with the students is a very positive experience here in this respect.
So how long have you been teaching here in Korea?
So my teaching is 2 years.
Okay.
Before that, I worked as like a researcher at the university for 2 years, a little more than 2, and then before that, I was a PhD student. So I would say that kind of my more independent research, I've been doing it for 2 years. Before that, I was directly under like a professor. So I was in a group of a professor. That is a very interesting question, and I don't know how much time have you spent with scientists and engineers.
Okay.
Because like in popular culture or just like a popular understanding, like scientists and engineers are usually just lumped together as like one big group, like the STEM group.
Yeah.
So people just think of them as nerds in general. But in my experience, like the mindset is very different. So when I was working in a pharma company, our group had both chemical engineers, chemists, so who took the science courses, and then we also had some people who were like originally from the pharmaceuticals, like a pharmacy.
The pharmacologist.
Yeah, pharmacologist background, and so same I can see with the students. So my current workplace, I work at the College of Sciences in the chemistry department, but before that I was at a research group in the electronic engineering department. And the mindset of both professionals and the students are very different from this. So engineering is a lot more like practically minded, which is, I guess it's not really a surprise. But so engineers care about science to the degree as they can use it
to put it into action.
Yeah, to predict like what kind of things I need to do. But they don't really bother about why things work the way they work. On the other hand, in the science department, there are a lot of students who pick up on this kind of mindset, the scientific mindset, much better. So I guess it's basically the way the education system goes, that once you are in sciences and you have to learn a lot of this kind of theoretical things, they are more interested in it. The scientific method itself, I think the students I directly work with, they are very, very well educated in that. I don't know how general it is because I can see that the professor who is leading the group, he puts in a lot of effort to do that kind of education. So I don't know if the students get that from their regular coursework, or this is because they just got like a very scientifically minded professor as their advisor. But yeah, I think this is something definitely students have to learn. But I think they are quite successful learning it once they have the appropriate professor to teach these things to them. Yeah, so physics is so I do chemistry because that is kind of like even like the book I teach from calls chemistry the central science, because it is kind of in the middle between physics and then biology. So physics is a very much an analytical type of science, or most of physics is very mathematical. So you know what your conditions are for the experiment, and then you have the laws of physics, which are basically mathematical equations that will describe what results you should get from that experiment. Biology, on the other hand, is mostly is a very much descriptive science, right? So I know, like when I was in university, there was this joke that like a biologist could like memorize like a whole novel for you, because like they basically have to learn, like I don't know, like if they learn digestive systems, every organism has different digestive systems, and there is, because evolution works the way it works, there is like some similarities, but it's kind of random. But on the other hand, a physicist would never be able to learn the whole book, but he could probably learn like what is the basic logic behind the story and could reproduce it. And the chemists are kind of like half-half. So I just recently read it on the internet that someone said that half of chemistry is coming up with rules, and then coming up with like the 30% of cases which don't follow those rules.
Okay. Then.
So in my perspective, the like physics, generally physicists are very very proud of that, but this is kind of the most exact of the sciences, where they have these very strict rules of how to describe whatever they are describing, and so I respect that a lot.
Okay.
Yeah, I think chemistry, we have to do something similar to that as much as we can. Of course, in a chemistry we have, so physicists usually work with like single particles, or two particles, three particles together, and if they have four particles, they are going crazy already. And in chemistry we have these molecules with like up to thousands of atoms in it, so we just simply don't have the power to deal in that detail with our problems that physicists do. So I think the mindset that physics has is very good, but you have to make compromises. So I don't know if you ever heard that joke that when you ask, like someone asks a physicist about like how much milk should they expect from their cow, and the physicists start with, okay, so let's assume that the cow is a perfect sphere in a vacuum.
Okay.
So they have to do these very simple models for their rigorous mathematics to work. Okay. That is basically the reason for that. For in chemistry, we try to be rigorous whenever we can. So I really like having a data-driven approach. So I like to collect as much data as possible and control the experimental conditions in a way that I can like understand how my results are related to whatever was happening during the experiment. But in chemistry, especially when you're doing experiments, there are a lot of factors that are basically impossible to control for. So one of my professors at university, he used to say when we were doing some like experiments in class that for your experiment to be successful, you need to follow the procedure very well, and you also have to make sure that the stars are well aligned.
Okay then.
I don't think so. So I got most of, like of course my family had a very big impact on me in a lot of ways. But I mean, as long as I've been conscious of my decisions, I always strived to get like the best impressions from everyone. So I wouldn't say that I really want to follow in the footsteps of my father, or I want to follow in the footsteps of my mother. I was always thinking about like what are the characteristics of my father, what are his personality traits that are positive that I should emulate, and then I try to emulate those and also mix in some things from my mother's side. So she of course also has her traits that really impacted me on a personal level, and on a professional level I am lucky to have had a lot of good teachers and good professors.
Okay.
So
In both Korea and Hungary.
yeah, yes. So of course my PhD advisor is his impact is probably the highest, because just based on the time and all the work that we have done together and we continue to do together. So I would say like professionally he made a big impact on me, but because by the time I started my PhD I already like worked in, like I spent already 8 years in chemistry, so I already had my own kind of ideas on my own approaches. So while I would say that he had a big impact on me, most of the things that I think are very important for the students to learn from him, I was lucky enough to have learned from other places beforehand.
Okay.
So
Great. Okay.
yeah, I think I had a lot of good kind of mentors previously. So honestly, I've always thought it's a bit of like a white lie when some people say that they have like one specific person.
Interesting. Okay.
Because ideally you want to, like no one's perfect, so ideally you want to get like your the impressions that you want to make should come from like piece by piece from the best possible sources, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah, big problem is competition, which I mean generally competition is good.
Yeah.
Because we have like multiple people trying to do things, and then someone will come up with the best idea. Problem is that now science is a very, like in general, a lot of people work in science, like compared to like 100 years ago. And specifically in our field, in the semiconductor field, in Asia there is a very big competition. So just at my university, I work at the semiconductor team in the chemistry department, but there is another professor who is also in the chemistry department who also works on semiconductors. In the physics department there are at least 2 groups working on semiconductors. Then the chemical engineering, they also do their own thing, and there is semiconductor research in the electronics engineering department. So competition is very big, which makes it difficult to come up with new ideas, because there are a very good chance that you come up with an idea and somebody already done something of it. And if the worst thing is that if you come up with an idea and you search for it and you don't see anyone reporting on it, that is still more likely that someone already did it and failed than that nobody came up with this idea before.
So that's so you could say fundamentally that's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
It means people are really like working towards something, right?
Yeah, the problem is that sometimes like the pressure for publication is so high that you will have some fraudulent works, which is very hard to like screen out just in general, because like no one really knows in these cutting edge fields like what is So we have some ideas what might be possible and what might be impossible. So sometimes I can read a paper and I think, okay, these guys, they definitely did not thought through what they were doing. But it is equally likely that I am not thinking through what they're doing correctly.
Okay.
So, and then was it like maybe 10 years ago, there was a very big scandal in the United States that was exactly my field, so organic semiconductor.
Okay.
There was a guy who just got his PhD from Germany and got a very prestigious job in the US. And simply the pressure for publication on him was so high that he just started fabricating data.
Okay.
And even though in his laboratory there was like a senior researcher who was kind of like skeptical of the research, so he was very much like grilling the guy every time they had a meeting. He was like asking his questions, but most of the other colleagues, they just thought, like just leave this guy alone. He's doing great work. Let's just publish. And they ended up retracting a lot of very high quality papers from very high quality journals.
Okay.
Because simply it was just for the journals themselves, it was impossible to tell if like it's cutting edge research, so it might as well as be as good as they say it. But of course, other people started to try to expand on the work, and they could not replicate the original work, and then that it turned out. But the problem is that now, so because almost as I said, like in Korea, every university has like 20 semiconductor research groups. Everyone has different equipment. Everyone, like even if you are purchasing the chemicals from some openly available sources like companies who sell these chemicals, we don't exactly know how consistent their production is. What happens if you buy it from a different supplier? How much different like the contaminations in this material will be? You cannot know how skilled the people working in the lab were. So, I mean, I've tried replicating studies exactly from other papers, but just based on the differences in equipment, sometimes you cannot get exactly the same conditions, you cannot get exactly the same results. So I think one of the biggest challenge is that, first of all, somehow you should be able to have original ideas that are actually true. And you also have to be able to figure out what kind of previously published research you can base your own work on. Because even if it's not intentional fraud that is published, because so many papers are getting published, maybe these guys, they just got very lucky and they got a very good result and they just published it and they never made the experiment ever again, so they never knew that, like in general, you cannot get that high of like it doesn't work, or it doesn't work as well. So yeah, and everyone wants to publish as much as they can, because that's like luckily I don't have very high requirements, so I have to publish one paper a year, which is not that much. So I have a paper which I worked on almost 6 years, because I ended up publishing like 3 papers on the same topic. So maybe I shouldn't say it's like the last paper was like 6 or 7 years after I started the work, but I still had to like use. So I was working towards a goal, but in the meantime I could get some like partial results which were good enough to be able to publish. So I would say like maybe like 2 years is a good goal from starting the research to publishing it. But most of my work during my PhD, I had to do it just by myself alone. And after that, I usually have like 1 or 2 students to help me out with the work. But in like bigger universities in the US or in China, sometimes they can just like spend 3 months with 10 or 20 students to do the experiments, and then they will have a much bigger data set which will increase their quality of work. So it is very difficult to compete with a big research group if they can spare all the resources which you cannot. Yeah, I mean, if it was absolutely useless, I guess people wouldn't have been doing it for 6,000 years. So I am like I took some philosophy courses, so I have some basic like formal education in the topic, but not much.
Okay.
Most of what I know from philosophy is like listening to YouTube
Okay.
on the topic, which So I would like to to believe that at least some of those sources are very good. But so there was one specific video which I think the channel name changed recently, and it is now Philosophy Engineered. So it's some kind of engineering guy talking about philosophy, and his big contention was that philosophy basically absolutely stopped progressing in the last 1,000 years. So they just basically discuss the same topics over and over again. Maybe they use different words, a little different approaches, but philosophy did not get closer to solve anything it set out to solve, because basically science took, like, originally science was part of philosophy, right? Like it was just called natural philosophy.
Exactly right. That's what it is, right? That's why my question is so kind of, what is science and what is natural philosophy?
Yeah.
Is it a linguistic problem?
Yeah, probably. I mean, well, these are just concepts that humans made up. So
Exactly right. Right. So it's like language. Language is only a tool used to know things.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the reason why I ask you, is because specifically that's what my book's about, right? And so because I've come from the humanities and my background is in humanities, the issue that I've had is more appertains to why people would be killing other people, right, with such passion, right? Like how you can bring yourself to kill people, or to gather in groups and kill other people, as opposed to thinking of scientific, natural, philosophic ideas.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that in general, like formal logic is very important for both sciences and just general for everything. So, I mean, there are a few things, like, I don't know if we can have any expectation to know the answers to some questions at all. So there might be just unanswerable questions about the world. Like there are some things that, like, you can make a lot of unfalsifiable statements, right?
Yeah.
So in science, science is as successful as it is because we just figured out that you have to make statements that are falsifiable, and you have to try to falsify them. And basically you can never know if something is true. You can only know that you haven't proven yet that it is false.
So would you say that most people, so out of the 7.8 billion people in the world, would you say that most people think this way, or most people don't think this way?
I don't think most people think that much.
Right. So that's an issue we agree on. Okay, so let's work up. Okay.
Yeah. So this is very interesting, but yeah, I mean, generally, like people, of course, think a lot in their everyday lives, but that type of thinking, like the natural way for humans to think is not that strict analytical thinking that you have to adopt to do science.
Yeah.
So as I said before, the students I work with have that kind of mindset because the professor they worked with instilled that mindset in them. And you can, I know that I remember having gone, I was back at university, I went out for like a hike with a group of a Christian student group.
Okay.
And there was one of some of the students were also from the chemistry department. That's why I knew them. And I was talking to one of the students, and he was complaining that one of the professors, he's like treating science as it could give you answers for everything, and how can you even base your raising your children on science? Like, isn't that something that is beyond science? And I personally, I don't think it is beyond science. I mean, you can absolutely make falsifiable claims about how to raise children, Like you can. So for me, I don't think that like science is something that you have to like restrict to a laboratory environment.
Yeah.
Like definitely, I mean, I know like most of the scientists are not really high opinions with on like social sciences or like economics, but I don't think it is because it is impossible to study those fields in science. I think most of the complaints are that the scientific rigor is not appropriately applied to those problems. So you just said before that like your interest was like why people kill each other. So I think that is something that could be studied scientifically. It is of course not really easy, and like you wouldn't want to set up a laboratory environment where people like kill each other and you measure things
we
about
can't do that.
Yeah.
Not anymore at least.
Yeah. So yeah, then I think generally like most of the things we are capable of answering, I think we could come up with a scientific way to answer that.
Okay.
The question is whether we should or not,
Okay.
or whether it's practical or not. Rather, maybe in economics, like there are a lot of different schools of economics. So I am very much interested in like finance and economics, and basically, like Austrian school of economics and what is the other one? It's named after some economist. I haven't listened to the economics podcast where they really talk negatively about Keynesians. So I used to listen to podcasts where they always like dismiss the Keynesians. So they are studying the same thing,
Yes.
but they use different models and they got to different conclusions. So if you have two different models which give you two different conclusions, like theoretically, if you apply the scientific method rigorously, sooner or later you should be able to tell which model describes reality better. But my guess would be, without much formal training in economics, that probably neither of the models is very accurate. Most people don't apply scientific thinking in their everyday lives, and the reason for that is not because people are stupid or something, it's impractical, and I guess it's impossible to be that rigorous when you have 24 hours per day to live, and you need to sleep, you need to eat, and so your resources are quite limited, and it makes no sense to have like thorough understanding of many things, and I guess humans are okay after like a few 100,000 years of doing that.
So my question merely is, so why would one person have a problem with the person who they're living to next door, right?
Yeah.
So that's why I saw, for example, so the centerpiece that I saw about your distinction between economics and other scientific fields is that I do believe that in our education, instead of having the anachronistic system where we have science of, oh, do you like science? You can study biology, physics, and chemistry. Instead, science should be treated as a holistic system. So something that everybody's doing. So somebody could do a branch of humanities, somebody could do chemistry, biology, psychology, and whatever that they feel inclined to.
Yeah.
And then that way people can have a better trained scientific type of thinking. But I think the issue is when we start to throw in things like theology and other archaic branches of philosophy, and then the issue, so for example, I'm from the UK, and in the UK we call it a multi-faith society. We say it's a melting pot of all of this. But when we look at the melting pot, it's like, okay, so some things can be caustic, some things can be corrosive, and so next thing you know, you have a neighbor who has a completely different system of thinking, where they fundamentally believe, well, I'll buy you something for your Christmas that you celebrate. However, your son will never, even if he's a really good and educated guy, he will never marry my daughter, and that's because you guys are going to hell. It's just like, what is hell? Where does hell come from? So, and we're not talking about people who are uneducated. We're talking about doctors. We're talking about doctors who carry their religions and carry their cultures and don't really think scientifically and just ask the question, wait, why on earth would this person be going to hell when there's no evidence? Isn't that what I look at? Evidence? And then, and then there are people who are experts in the field who have huge theories about what God is thinking, and it's just like, so what I usually say, for instance, is why are we going to talk about whether a unicorn is an even-toed ungulate or an odd-toed ungulate if we first haven't found the evidence for the unicorn, right? Yeah. And so that's my biggest gripe, and I say that because my background is Nigerian, and I'm extremely superstitious as well. And so it can be dangerous type of thinking if we don't think a bit more scientifically. So like the issues that you talked about, were, I think, good problems. If people are making fraudulent papers because they need to publish something to feed their children or stay in the United States, for example, if his visa's tied to it, it's like, go for it. But if it's a bigger issue, then I think it can be a bit more deleterious.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with you on that having like science education, as if like science is made up of the subjects of chemistry, physics, biology, and geology, and if you really want to, maybe mathematics, but that's not a science.
It's more of a language, right?
Yeah, mathematics is a tool, but it's a very useful tool, but it's useful for science, so that's why usually like people teach it alongside science, of course. But science is not chemistry, science is not physics, science is not biology. Science is a way of understanding things. It's a way of
knowing things. Right?
Yeah, it's a way of connecting the dots. It's a way of like making up a working model in which you can predict what will be the results of certain like starting conditions. So, I mean, you can definitely look at history scientifically. So you can compare like different events in history, and you can compare what the causes of that event was, what was the result, and how these multiple events relate to each other based on like, and maybe you can formulate some model on what kind of inputs will cause what kind of results, and maybe you could use that to understand how societies change over time. And yeah, I think it's definitely like the people who are more like into the humanities, let's say, they definitely don't get that kind of education, right? So I don't know how it goes in the UK, but when I was in school, in high school, we didn't really get like much of an education on how to do science, even in the science classes. And those students who decided to go more on the humanities road, I am quite sure that they have never been taught about the scientific method. So, I mean, I know people with whom you could argue for hours about like star signs and things like that, and they will like be convinced that you are like whatever your personality is, it's because you are a Sagittarius or whatever.
That's worryingly far too popular than it used to be in 2024.
And it is very interesting. So, and when I was always very skeptical about it, and I was always very outspoken about my skepticism. And usually the answer to that is, well, but you don't know everything. I mean, yes, of course, but that doesn't really allow you to just make shit up.
Great. Okay. So what I found there. So what you've done is you've just reached the road of philosophy. So the biggest objection to scientists, and you'll hear it reverberated in, let's say, godly setting in divine places in churches. Those scientists, they think they know everything, but they don't know A, B, and C. And so the idea is this is where philosophy comes in, and this is where we have to use a bit of logic, and this is why Kant is one of my favorite philosophers, because he suggested, look, we can use science for everything, but here are four exceptions. And so what we can try and do is, instead of saying this happened just because, what we can try and do is research together, find out why that happened, instead of trying to fill in the dots with your own, well, we call it methodological naturalism, where you use faith, or you take a leap of faith, or you try and jump over just so that you can confirm your own bias. And that's why I think philosophy is important with science, because people can really use emotions to get people behind things that aren't evidence-based, and then you can radicalize people, and then you can get bombs and you can kill people, and it's a bit of a slippery slope.
Yeah, there is this very famous clip on, or some, I think it's some American journalist like saying, tide goes out, or tide comes in, tide goes out, you cannot explain that. Which is,
This is the moon, right?
yeah, which is very similar to one of my classmates at university was like telling me. We were studying about rainy scattering, which is basically what causes the sky to turn blue and during the day and turn orange at sunset and sunrise. And my classmate was laughing, and now I have to go home and tell my grandmother that she was telling me lies because she always said that science cannot explain why the setting sun turns red.
Exactly right. Exhibit A.
Yeah, so this is, that is one part when people say that, but you don't know everything about Jupiter, so maybe actually Jupiter is what makes you like a gullible person. But like when they say that like science cannot explain the color of the sky when it can and have been able to for 100 years, that is like a dangerous mix of ignorance and, I don't know, wishful thinking. I'm not sure if it's wishful thinking, but yeah.
So now we're moving towards the question I really want to ask you. It might be a simple question for you, but so do you believe in God? Which is a loaded question.
I mean, what do you mean by God, and what do you mean by belief?
Great question. Well, it's more like, what do you mean by God, right? First, I'd have to prove that God existed before I can ask you about it, and thus it's loaded. So what is your opinion on the sociological issue of God?
Because like this is, I am not religious. My family was not religious, and I never there was not a point in my life when I would have considered myself a believer.
Mm-hmm.
But like this is one of the things like my religious friends usually like would say is that, but like how can you say that you don't believe in God? What if God is, and then they will say something, and I mean, like of course, but isn't it like if someone thinks that God has those kind of properties, isn't it like their job to show me? So should I like take all possible like a supernatural phenomenon one by one and go by that? Or maybe if someone who already thought about that could just like give me what should I believe in, and then I can assess the specific claims.
Mm-hmm.
So of course Hungary is a very Christian, like a Christian majority country, and well, at least like it's kind of like split between Protestants and Catholics.
Okay.
So we have kind of some split in that, but in general, so if anyone asks you in Hungary whether you believe in God, it's a Christian God. It's about Jesus Christ. So I mean, I can give some reasons why I don't believe in that God, but if you get the same question from a Muslim or from a Hindu, like, do you believe in a God, do you believe in the supernatural, they might mean something very different.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Muslims will tell you that they believe in the same God as the Christians, but like listening to what they say about their God, and like how Muslims describe the God who is supposed to be the same as the God the Christians describe, it's kind of I don't know in that, like what does it mean that it is the same God? What do they mean by that they believe in the same God? So
so that's why I think And what is interesting, so right now, scientists are trying to figure out if there's a part of the brain that is susceptible to the idea of like divine thought. And the reason why I think it's an interesting proposition is because, like I said, it's not something that's isolated, between people who are not very educated. This is going all the way up in institutions, and there are millionaire pastors and priests and things like that. And so, and like you said, even in the United States, we have a scientist who's very popular in the UK, who's famous, is Richard Dawkins, who gone to the States in his prime, in his career. And he went around and showed how preposterous it was, how religious people were. And we're talking about the United States, one of the most educated countries in the world. And so even, again, you look at India, you look at parts of China, and then you look at the Middle East as well, Sub-Saharan Africa. It's not something that's solely related to poverty or education, but it seems like it's a human thing, and so it's interesting.
No, I never was convinced. Yeah, maybe when I was like very young, maybe I might have thought that like to believe in the supernatural is to be stupid. So that's definitely not the case. I mean, this is something that like people would tease each other with in high school or something. But yeah, like I think that comes back to the problem that we have 24 hours in a day. Yeah. We have things to do. We don't have the time and the energy to sit down and think about everything. So people generally, if something worked culturally for hundreds of years, then people stick to it. Like and it doesn't. I say hundreds of years because you can see even like Mormonism, which is a relatively young religion. Yeah. It is going strong. I don't know about Scientology. Maybe they will. Yeah, they will end falling apart as much as I can see. They are not really growing anymore. I mean, people have their own like reasons to think what they think. I remember like when I was in primary school, some of my classmates would go to this the religious education classes in the afternoon, like once a week or something. So like half my class would leave, and while we were back there working on our homeworks, and like there were two guys who would like think about what if heaven is in a different galaxy or something, like trying to mix these kind of, because as a child you learn about the different galaxies, but you also learn about heaven. And I think maybe like it's a kind of the naivete of a child that they try to connect everything in their heads, but as an adult you learn that you don't have time for that in a lot of time. So
that's where philosophy would say you're perfectly fine to have your theories. When you find the evidence, come and speak to us and get your Nobel Prize.
Yeah, I guess.
Right? That's it. So the burden of proof is on them. And it's great to theorize, and there's no problem with it. There's space for God, but we cannot, we should not act like the tooth fairy exists until there's enough evidence, and we have to take her seriously, right?
Yeah. So I personally, I like proven things. But it's not easy to. There are many things that are not easy to prove. So I mean, there is like a good question, like what would a scientist have to see in a microscope or in a telescope to have a proof for God? And I mean, I guess if we had a God who would turn the sky pink every even hour, then we could like look up at the sky and see it turn pink or something. But yeah, I guess when we have 1,000 different claims about from different people, it's not really easy.
Yes, I always say I could go to heaven and I could spend 900 billion years with God, and after 900 billion years I could say, you know what, I really want to thank you for the past 900 billion years. We've had a great time, heaven's very nice, it's clean, people are civilized, all of these things. But I do have one question to ask you, and please don't be offended. Where did you come from? You can say, oh, Aaron, you should have asked. I came from my God, right? And so now we have the problem of ad infinitum, and what Kant talks about as one of his antinomies, which is it's a problem that our human brain cannot figure out. We cannot deal with infinite things or numbers.
Yeah, I mean that's why we invented mathematics.
Yes, right.
That has, and then in that case we can at least formally work with things we cannot understand.
Yeah.
So that is a very useful tool. And that's what I like. I am not really good at maths, but that's what I really like about things that can be described in mathematical terms. Because even if you don't really understand what's going on, you know the rules, how you work with the equations, how you solve them, and you can get results. But of course, some things are very complicated and you cannot have an easy mathematical description. So let's just think about like drugs, because I mean pharmaceuticals, because I work in that field.
Okay.
So for a drug to get approved for your headache or any kind of ailment, it does not have to make every headache go away, right? So there is no criteria that a drug has to work 100% of the time, because we are aware that like even though humans are kind of similar, there are enough differences between people that the same chemical will have different effects in different people, right? So like for you maybe Tylenol works best, for me maybe aspirin works the best, so my head hurts. And like when it comes to like complex ailments like cancer, there are, so like every week you can find some news somewhere on the internet that someone has a magic cure for cancer, but in general cancer is not one type of disease, right? So multiple types of cancer, even the same type of cancer in different people might have different characteristics that you need to treat differently. The company I worked for was developing drugs for mental problems, like Alzheimer. And like the brain is very complicated, every person has a different brain, so you can never get something to work 100% of the time. You have to like balance things. So in that case, you cannot make up like a mathematical equation that will tell you what will happen, like if I take this drug, what will happen to my brain. But you can write down an equation which works with like if you give this drug to 100 people who have this problem, out of that 100 people, what are your expectations? So how many will be cured, how many will not be cured, how many will actually turn out worse because of some kind of side effect. And if you think that it is very difficult for people to understand the science, like try to talk to people about statistics, because even scientists have a hard time when it comes to uncertainty. So once you have complex systems, we have mathematical tools which we can use to describe. So you could make a study, like if we turn back to the religion question, for example, you can make a study like about prayer. Like, of course, maybe you don't know the mechanism, like if I pray, you don't have an equation that describes what would that cause, but you could make a study where you have 100 people to pray, and then you compare like what happened with whatever they were praying for versus like 100 people who did not pray but did something else. And you could use these methods to compare, but these are even more complicated. So if it is difficult for many people to understand how Newton's laws of motion describe the motion of things, like it will be like 100 times less people who will understand how this statistical phenomena works. So I recently read someone complaining like, oh, there is this school which has 300 students, and out of these 300 students, how come like 30 students came up with something that should only appear in like 0.5% of the population. But of course, if something appears in 0.5% of the population, it doesn't mean it is distributed evenly about every kind of possible metric.
Yeah.
It is very much possible that you end up with 10% of people having this condition even without like, so it's not like, it's not about they are like spreading it between each other or something. So if it's like a genetical condition, it can still happen because just randomly there will be 1,000 schools which have 300 students, and in some of these there will be 0 people, and in some there will be more than the average. So will should be free. Let's free will. No, I don't think so. I think free will is an illusion.
Okay. And why? Why is that?
Because, like, I think free will is just logically impossible.
Okay.
I think that free will, what would free will actually look like? So, I like this like thought experiment. Is like close your eyes and think about 3 celebrities. And are you really free? Do you have any freedom in choose? Like, it's like nothing. There is no material restrictions on whichever celebrities you choose. There is no one's pointing a gun at your head to choose Will Smith. You know, if we are talking about free will, but there is going to be a reason why what 3 names you come up with. And actually, if like you do like, I heard about this. They do experiments and they put you in an MRI machine, and you have to like choose red or green or something. Similarly, like absolutely inconsequential things, and areas in your brain light up before you actually realize what you were choosing. But even without those kind of experiments, like I cannot like really like what would be a really free will. So could I,
if you choose, so of course we're in a fortunate position to be sitting in quite a conservative country, right? Relaxed at the moment. But some people are facing the death penalty, right? Do you believe in people like that? Those people, do you think that they had freedom when they came to do nefarious things? Or do you think it's simply an act of no free will?
I don't think I have the free will to answer this question in any, like, I mean, if free will would mean, right, that I could have just answered the previous question, whatever, but I chose one answer which I chose because all my previous life experience that shaped my opinion, right?
Yeah.
And I believe that people who do nefarious things come to the conclusion that they have to do those nefarious things based on that. So I personally don't think that any kind of punishment, either death penalty, prison, or financial compensation, these kind of things, that we should base that on on specifically the perpetrator of that specific case. So I think punishments have, like, I guess, a few roles in society. So I think punishment is an instrument. So that's how I like to think about it, as an instrument. So death penalty definitely stops that specific person to commit the whatever heinous crime they committed before. So that, I guess, that checks out, unless of course you accidentally get someone who was innocent.
Yeah.
But that can be achieved by life imprisonment, putting them on an island like the British did in Australia.
Yeah.
So there are other methods for that. Definitely in most societies, punishment as an instrument is also to like calm down the population. So the population, generally people have like an expectation of revenge or something, like if they are wronged, and both prison and the death penalty, I think, is kind of served. I don't think it should, but it definitely in many societies, because I guess for societal stability, that somehow this is how it turned out, but it serves that kind of purpose. But I think generally punishment should serve the purpose of keep society stable and more people just to not commit the crime in the first place. So if I know that I can go to prison for stealing your camera, then I will not steal your camera. But then again, it's not about free will, because when I know that I will have a punishment for stealing, and then therefore I decide not to steal, that's not free will. I just have the inputs, I know the law, I know the social and the legal consequences of the actions.
Not necessarily stopping them. Exactly, right?
Yeah, and so there are, it may stop some people, it may not stop other people, but we can go back to statistics and figure out a method which works the best for most cases. And we can come up with, like, there are people like psychopaths who just lack any kind of like inner like feeling that would block them to do bad things. So maybe, we have to pay more attention to those kind of people. I'm not saying that we should just preventively put all psychopaths on an island or something, but definitely we should.
No, I agree. I mean, I think the worrying thing that I see today, so for example, again, they have an appeal to authority type of thing, right? So when people argue, they say, my father's a lawyer, this is how I know, my grandfather's a judge of this place, right? And so the interesting thing, again, more specifically in the United States, when we watch crime shows and stuff, is that, again, they bring in religion. And when we think about swearing and the oath and things like that, I think it's dangerous territory as well. When we call people psychopaths, or we use, I think, for example, I would completely ban the word evil. If you're a detective, there are detectives who say, yeah, I remember the first time I laid eyes on him, I could just see pure evil. Although you use words like cold-hearted, and I'm like, where's the evidence that people have these cold hearts, right?
Yeah.
And so dangerous words like that, instead of, like you said, the scientific method would be to, let's ask why. Why would the person choose to do this? Living in a social contract where the person knows that they could go to prison, why would they do or commit this heinous crime? Maybe we should do some more research. And just because they can't do the research, because we can't pull out poor children, right, and watch videos of their lives, and it becomes complicated. And so that's why I think it's this question, like you said, about free will. You move right into political philosophy, and you're talking about punishment. So for example, here in South Korea, they still have the death penalty, right? And the last time they used the death penalty was in 1998, right? And so it's not like there's much of an issue, but when there are certain crimes that have been committed, you will see the public ask for the death penalty, and that part is the worrying part, because look, there's no free will, it's logically impossible.
Yeah, but as I said, in most societies, punishment has that kind of revenge. People like revenge.
You do like it.
I personally, I don't think it's a useful feeling in modern society. So revenge makes a lot of sense in like tribal, when we were just living in like tribes of 150 people, because then revenge is the only deterrent that groups have on each other. So my group will not attack the other group, we will not take their food, because we know that if we do that, they will take revenge on us, and so therefore it's better to not do that. But in a modern society, which is supposedly based on rule of law, the deterrent should not, like, revenge itself does not have you can see people like flipping off each other on the street because they know that the other person will it cannot get at you and like just beat you up, because that's not the society we live in anymore. So
It's expensive,
yes.
especially here in South Korea.
Yeah, I heard that it's even if someone attacks you, you should just like the most thing you should do is like cover your face, never hit back, because if they attack you and you hit back and you break their nose,
Oh, yeah.
you have to pay for their, so they will have to pay for your damages, but you will have to pay also.
That's right.
So
Yeah. You have to curl into a ball.
yes, it's easier just to take it and then later ask for the money.
Exactly right. Try and make profit off the surgery bill that you get.
Yeah, just go to the best hospital you can. Even if I could make methamphetamine,
Yeah.
you should not ask me, because you would probably get garbage from me, because I barely passed my organic laboratory classes.
Okay. Well, okay, so we'll wrap it up here. Thank you very much
Yeah,
for your
that's
time.
no problem.
And what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave some details of some of the papers that you've written, like your research areas, things like that. Contact details if people are interested in speaking to you about it. And then, yeah. So thank you again.
Yeah, thanks.
And enjoy the rest of your weekend.
You too.
Great. Perfect.